Hey everybody, I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. The Midnight Gospel coming out this weekend. Duncan Trussell's here with us. What's going on, man? How are
Hello.
you?
I'm great. I'm doing really good. All things considered, it's been quite surreal to be doing publicity for the Midnight Gospel during a global pandemic. These ways of encountering people that normally you would be encountering probably person to person. There's something really poignant about it. But I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's good to be hanging out. And like you said, the technology has come so far. It's strange at times, but at least we could hang out and talk about the show. And people have plenty of time to watch the show. I'll tell you that. So that's a plus for you guys. So what was it like putting this whole thing together?
Well, it was one of my favorite years of my life. I'm not an animator, and I in the world of animation is a real inside club that is hard to get into. And I got lucky because Pendleton Ward, who created Adventure Time, listened to my podcast way back before people really even knew what podcasting was. Like those were the days when if you said you want to be on my podcast, someone might be like, "What's a podcast?" No, it's a computer thing. But I'm fortunate because he listened to my show for a while and then reached out to me, and we became friends. And after he left Adventure Time, he called me and said, "You want to get coffee? I think I have an idea of maybe a way to animate your podcast." And my heart leapt in my chest. Like, oh my God, this guy created one of the greatest animated series of all times. He's got an idea. We went and got coffee, and at the end of our coffee, he's like, I just don't know if I have time right now, man. I'm like, oh, okay.
You're like, cool, awesome.
Cool, yeah, we're busy. I understand. I'm busy too. But then about a year later, he reached out to me again, and we started developing this idea that became the Midnight Gospel. But to be working with Pendleton, it's I don't know. It's like being invited into the Bohemian Grove or something as far as animation goes, because he's such a brilliant artist, and he knows so many brilliant animators and people who work in that field, that he assembled this team around us of just some of the most mystical artists that I've ever encountered in my life, and it was a real joy to work with him and develop the show.
That's really cool. So what was the best part of the whole experience for you?
Wow. Well, the for me, the best part of the whole experience, without giving away any spoilers, it was watching the finished final episode of the series, because it's a very personal and very deep conversation that I had with my mom, and just to see the way that these animators were able to bring her to life, so to speak, having never met her, and to watch that with my wife. I have a 1 year old, and to know that, oh wow, that's the way he's going to meet his grandmother. It was one of the most surreal, sweet moments of my life, outside of the birth of my child and getting married.
That's really profound. And I think it's interesting because like animation is this point of entry for you to have this experience, for other people to enjoy it. Like your podcast has been a point of entry for people to come in, to be able to have these real conversations in different places is awesome. So what was it like to use animation to unpack layers, not only in your life, but with other storylines?
It was challenging. It was challenging because, I think the medium of podcasting has shown us that we need more time. We need these long form conversations to get to know each other. And who imagine sitting down with somebody and trying to get to know them in 6 or 7 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever the limitation of the particular interview that you're doing is. It would be tough. But with a podcast, we get hours, as much time as you want. So compressing, so to take that medium and then alchemically convert it into animation in a way that doesn't lose what I consider to be what's so wonderful about podcasting, which is intimacy, the vulnerability, the humanness of it, it was a challenge, because we still had to boil it down to 20-minute episodes. We had to take hour-long conversations and pluck out the pieces of them that we thought were the most important, and then create a coherence between those chunks, and then merge that with, zombie apocalypses in a way that wouldn't bring people out of the conversation or out of enjoying cartoony, psychedelic catastrophes, which is what is the setting for the show.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that it's like precisely what you had in your mind and what you're doing with the show. It's like now it's spilled out onto the canvas of this animated series. Like that must be incredible for you for a lot of different reasons.
It really is. I mean, to me, it's incredible to get to be a part of that process and to witness what happens when people trust each other enough that they can collaborate in the way that we collaborated with all the folks at Titmouse, and a kind of group mind forms, and animation, I guess you could say, or the thoughts of that mind, being sort of projected onto a screen. It's just an amazing thing to see what happens when hundreds of people all focus on one intent. To me, it was really mystical, and I mean that not in a hyperbolic way. I mean, it was like divine. It felt as though I was getting an encounter with God.
Have you thought about what it will be like when your son checks this out when he's a little bit older?
A lot bit older.
A few more years down the road, yeah.
Let me tell you, many years out. This is not a show for kids. So, and I have thought about that a lot, and I have thought about, the podcast in general, because some of the topics we discuss in there are, not for children. They're adult conversations. But also what's fascinating about podcasting is you end up with this sort of online journal of your life. And the person you are when you started podcasting versus the person you are wherever you are now, assuming you're a podcaster, or whenever you started, whatever your particular art form, whatever your mode of expression is, those are going to be two different people as time progresses. So it's a continuum, So I'm excited on one level for my son to see the show. And then on another level, there's a little bit of, I'm already preparing for the many explanations I'm going to have to give him about what we were talking about.
So you mentioned a really interesting topic. Who were you before the podcast started? Like, take me back to when this thing was first getting going for you.
Wow, cool. Okay. Well, before the podcast started, I had 2 testicles, a mother, and a father. And the person I am now is a cancer survivor with 1 testicle and no mother and no father. So over the course of my podcast, I have lost 3 things that were really important to me.
Yeah. And hey, you're still here to tell the story. That's
right. And the testicle, of course, being the least important thing,
Yes.
I still managed to produce life. So you only need one of those things. But, this encounter with truth that I had, and that we will all have, that every human being, and that we're all sharing this encounter right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
To me, that encounter with truth produces the possibility of a great deal of personal evolution and growth, and also the ability to have compassion for other people, because we're all in this together, And so yeah, I think probably the best way to put it would be, before I started podcasting, I was kind of like a temporal trust fund kid, I guess you could say, in the sense that I thought I had a lot of years in the bank. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna live
life
forever.
changes real quick.
That's right. And then suddenly you realize, I don't know if I even have tomorrow, and I don't know if I have tomorrow with the people I love most. And so that, I don't mean that in a morbid way. For me,
real.
yeah, that's real. And I think that really helps me sometimes on good days not take what I have for granted.
I think it's really important to have that perspective. And, you're somebody that makes people laugh, and you have really important conversations, and you entertain. When did you realize that you would serve that role? Like, how old were you when you were like, this is going to be the road for me?
Oh, never. No age did I realize that. I feel so lucky that this is my job. And, when I was a kid, I can remember my dad had like a Bill Cosby comedy album. This is before What Happened, whatever. And
No, listen, Cosby was the guy at that point. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
huge
Yeah.
spot in the comedy history.
Yes, exactly. I don't know why we live in such a surreal time that you
No, I get it. You got
say
to
that.
your statements, but at that time, you're growing up like that. That's the guy everybody's listening to.
Yeah, I just learned to use a record player.
Right.
So I remember listening to him, and I had never heard professional comedy before, and I remember like the falling on the ground laughing and not being able to stop laughing and how good that felt. And I was awestruck that this person could tell stories like this in a way that rhythmically was making me have seizures of laughter as a kid. But I didn't have the confidence then, or even I never thought I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to go and be a stand-up comic, or it all just sort of for me happened as many strokes of good luck, I guess you could say. I ended up working at the Comedy Store on the phones. I didn't want to be a comic then, but then they give you 3-minute spots at the Comedy Store that I started doing. And then I got to be friends with Joe Rogan, who took me on the road before I should ever have been going on the road. And then during this time I started doing a podcast, and Pendleton Ward listened to it and then decided to collaborate with me on this show. So to me, everything seems to be it's just grace is the only way I could put it. And it's really tough for me to like look at myself and think, oh yeah, you're the one who did any of this. Though, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. So how old were you when you were on the road with Rogan? Like, how much comedy had you done at that point?
Oh my, not enough. See, that was this was when Joe was on Fear Factor, and at the time I was doing a satanic puppet act, and he thought it was funny to these were, again, this is pre-podcasting days, and the people who were coming to his shows were either like hardcore comedy fans or people who would watch Fear Factor and thought, I want to go see the host of Fear Factor tell jokes, not realizing that, they were walking into a Joe Rogan stand-up show, which is, you wouldn't call it family friendly necessarily.
No,
so, and he knew that dynamic, and I guess he just thought it was hilarious that the person who was bringing him on stage was doing a satanic puppet act.
That's amazing.
It was amazing, and it wasn't just that, but he's such a mentor to comics, and over the course of like touring with him, he teaches you some really important things. I mean, you can't teach someone to be funny, but he teaches, he talks a lot about how people in the audience paid for babysitters. Mm-hmm. This is a big night for them. Never ever take it for granted. Never ever be lazy up there, because this means something to them. And anytime you're sloppy, anytime I was sloppy when I was touring with him, he would definitely let you know backstage, which I appreciate.
Advice.
Yeah, it is with anything.
Yeah, because people are always watching, and you must have had the chance to see some great people at the store, even when you were answering phones. Like, who do you remember checking out at that point?
My favorite memory was George Carlin would come and work out his specials in the main room of the Comedy Store. And he is, one of the great legendary comedians. And so Mitzi, knowing how much I loved him, let me greet him in the parking lot and walk him back to the main room. And oh man, he gets out of his car. He's got this little suitcase. I'm just, I think my hands were probably shaking. And I said to him, can I carry your bag, Mr. Carlin? And he goes, it's George, kid. And I always carry my own bag.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. And I remember walking with him towards the main room. He's fully aware of the fact that, and I'm sure anyone who is a comedy fan that's around him. He by that time he'd gotten used to the people reacting to him like I was. But I remember we walked by the payphone. At that time, there were still payphones. That was in the hallway of the Comedy Store, and he reached into the place where the quarters would drop out to check to see if there was a quarter there, and then looked at me to make sure I saw him do that, and got a big smile on his face. And it was just amazing, to be with like a legend who was also one of the sweetest comics I ever met.
That's really cool that you have that story, and it's been an amazing journey for you. And having this show now is really awesome. So when people do check it out, what are the big things you want them to take away thinking?
Well, I want them to take away. I don't want to give them anything to take away from it. For me, the title of the show sums up what the show means to me, but that's just what it means to me. Gospel means good news, and a lot of times midnight gets associated with darkness or fear or panic or what is that, the doomsday clock? We're always 2 seconds to midnight or whatever. And I think anybody out there who's been through any kind of traumatic experience has probably during that time had an encounter with something that isn't scary, something that seems to be the opposite of the way that they're expecting to feel. When I got my cancer diagnosis and was, coming to terms with the new reality that I was, hopefully going to be a cancer survivor, I can remember in the fear and in the panic and in the terror, suddenly I was experiencing what seemed to be an underlying web of love that's inside of everything that I couldn't see before that. And so to me, I think that that's what moments of catastrophe offer us, is a chance where a window opens for a second through which a very beautiful light shines. And that's the good news, I think. The good news is that no matter how turbulent stuff gets, I think there's always some little beam of light, some mote of love inside of there for us to find that can carry us through even the roughest moments. Now, that's my own opinion about the show. I want people to draw their own opinions regarding what it means to them, but that's how I feel about it.
Beautifully said. Duncan, thanks for hanging out, man. Best of
My
luck, and we'll
pleasure.
talk to you down the road, all right?
Thanks for having me on. Thank you so much. Cheers. Thank you.